All right, so this demonstration is going to be how to recycle clay. Here I have the different states of clay. I've got bone dry clay here. I've got wet clay. I've got leather hard clay, clay that I can't really squeeze and dent. And then I've got slip or kind of liquid clay. So when we're recycling, it depends on what you need to recycle. Your clay could be in one of these three states, and you want to bring it to this state. So it depends on which one yours is in or somewhere in between. To recycle clay that is bone dry, we need to soak it in water. So I've got a little jar of water here, and I'm going to throw this in there, and we'll talk about that piece of clay in a second. When the clay is leather hard, it really doesn't want to absorb water. So if I put that in here as well, this won't really absorb water, but the bone dry clay will very quickly. So if your clay got too dry, we would need to add water to it. If your clay is too wet, we need to remove water from it. So those are kind of the two scenarios that you're going to be in. If you're on the wheel, you probably are throwing on the wheel, and then your clay got too wet because you added water when you centered it, you added water when you opened it, when you raised it, and let's say your pot collapsed, or you tore the top half off, or you just don't like it. You're gonna have clay that's too wet. It might be a mixture of some clay like this. This is actually that clay. This is people's mistake pots. You can see it has the slip sometimes on the outside from where they were throwing, and then it's the clay on the inside. So it might be a mix of these two clays. We need to get all of this clay to the same moisture level. So we need to dry the water off of the slip. So to do that, we need to put it onto a dry surface. The tables and these bats are made out of HardieBacker, which is this really drying material. It will dry the clay very quickly. You can tell here, I had clay drying here earlier, and so this has absorbed water and this has not. It really depends in class how you want to recycle the clay. If you wanted to have this piece of clay, this slippy wet clay, be ready to be used by the end of the class period, I'll show you how to do that. Maybe it's Friday and you want it ready on Monday when you get back over the weekend. There's a way to do that. Let's say that it's Monday and you're not going to be here until Wednesday. So it's like a 1 day wait. I can show you how to do that. Okay? It's funny. Encapsulation. I don't think you guys could hear that, but it's annoying me. The bone dry clay that I had soaking for a little bit, I'm going to break this in half so you can see how this process works. You can see on the inside here how the water is slowly working its way from the outside to the inside. And so I'm going to put this back in there, and you're going to see progressively that white center, kind of looks like a Reese's peanut butter cup, that white center is going to get fully hydrated. And then once it's fully hydrated, honestly, maybe a minute later, it's going to all turn into to slime. It'll immediately go to slime. Okay, so right now, this is not leather hard clay. It might look like the leather hard clay, but the leather hard clay hasn't gotten any wetter. It might look like this, but it's not the same. So I'm going to put that back in, and you'll see this is going to turn to liquid, and that's still going to be hard. So put those in there, and we're back. So first, if you're like someone on the wheel, this would be your scenario. If you're hand building, what you have is you have some clay that, let's say you rolled a slab with some clay. Okay. I'm gonna do this in a dry spot. Let's say that you rolled a coil, you rolled a slab, whatever it is, and it's been sitting on the table for a little while, or you rolled it there, and this clay is gonna be a little too dry for you. It's gonna be getting close to leather hard. Your job is actually really easy. Take this, dunk it in water so that it's wet, wrap it in plastic. That's all you have to do, okay? And then after about 5 minutes, that clay will be soft again. So when you guys are rolling slabs with the colored clay, just make sure that when you roll your slab, take your scraps, dip them in water right after you cut out the shape you need, ball them up, and stick them in a plastic bag wet. This will keep that clay really wet for you. And so your clay's always soft. If you're, let's say, on the wheel or you're hand building, and let's say you threw a pot, or you were slab building a box, and you come back the next day and it's cracked. Or worst case scenario, someone dented it. For you to recycle it, it's better to not try to recycle the leather hard clay. It's better to let it dry out all the way and then recycle it as wet, as like bone dry clay, because the bone dry clay turns into this stuff very quickly. So most of our recycling is going to be either adding or taking away water. If I had some too wet clay and I wanted this to dry up by the end of the class period, I would spread it thinly on the table or on this board. And then in about 30 minutes, I'd flip it like a pancake and it'll flip over. And about 30 minutes later, it'll be ready to work. And that's what I'm gonna do in class with this. If I wanted this to sit until tomorrow, I might take the plastic, put it over the top of this ball because it's less surface area touching the board. Tomorrow it would be ready. If I wanted this to be over the weekend, I would probably set it on a piece of plastic and put it in my locker. And then if I put it in my locker over the weekend, the lockers aren't sealed, it's sitting on plastic, so nothing's really drying it out, and just air and time will dry it out. That's like a 2-day drying period, okay? But the locker, there's no wind, there's no air hitting it, the heaters aren't affecting it directly because it's in a little box. That would work better. And there's so many variations of how you dry your clay out. I'm gonna try to dry this out in the class period. So I'm basically just gonna take this really, really soft clay, this slip, and I'm just gonna flatten it into a pancake. It's about the thickness of a pancake, and I just leave it there. Okay, and I'm gonna leave that there for about half an hour. And then I'll flip it, and then in about half an hour, it'll be ready. Now I'm gonna check back in on my bone dry clay. So here's my bone dry clay. I'm gonna break it, and you can see that that white area is almost gone. It's getting really, really thin. Okay, and the clay is starting to get crumbly. You see I broke it, and it broke into like 3 or 4 pieces. This is about to turn into a liquid. I'll pull my leather hard clay back out. I still can't press into it. It's still too firm. This hasn't changed at all. Now, if I take this with this little bit of slip and water on it, and I wrap it in plastic overnight, in 12 hours, 14 hours, it will get softer. But it takes hours, not minutes. Okay? So, that is the process of drying the clay out, or rehydrating the clay, which is what we're doing here. So while this is drying, I'm going to show you the second step, just so you can see this piece of clay here that I have that's soft. This is the piece from last class period. I had it on a board. I let it sit on the board for 30 minutes. I flipped it over. I let it sit for 30 minutes. I pulled it off, and now it's a soft piece of clay ready to work. Okay? And then I wrapped it in plastic so I could show it to you here. And this is what you're trying to get to. So I'll add that to my ball of clay. This is from the clay cart, and this is just soft clay. And you can see some of the clay has like liquidy stuff on it from someone throwing, and then most of it is just soft clay. If I put this on the table and I throw it down, or I start working this on the table, because there's sticky clay, it's gonna start sticking to the table. So the first thing I might do with this is just rip it in half and slam it together, and rip it in half and slam it together. Now, for a lot of you, that's a lot of physical hand strength. You can also take it and cut it with your wire tool and just slice it into a few slices. Take those slices, fold them in half, and slam it together and slam it together. We're trying to get there not to be wet parts and dry parts. We're trying to get it all to the same moisture content. And so I might do that. And I'm cutting it the other way. And then I'm just pounding these together. And now, if you looked at this clay closely, there's not any wet areas. That just pounded it together. This is also a kind of wedging. This is what would be called like slam wedging or slap wedging. If I take the clay that has air pockets in it, which is what we're trying to get rid of, you can see air bubbles in it, and I take the clay and I give it a lot of force and I throw it down, that force pushes air out of the clay. So the next thing we're trying to do is to remove air from the clay. Now, if you do this wrong, you'll add air to it. But once you've recycled your clay, there's a lot of air bubbles in it. The machine in the back, the pug mill, removes the air bubbles. And so this is how, or the vacuum pulls the air bubbles out. We can do that manually. Most potters, most high school ceramic students, they learn this thing I'm showing you now on the first day. This is the first thing you learn. It's called wedging. This is how you prepare your clay. Even if you grab the logs from the clay chest, you should do this for about like 15, 20 seconds. Because if those logs have been sitting in there for any amount of time and people leave the clay chest open, the outside surface of the log is a little drier than the inside, which means that the inside is softer and the outside is harder. So when you go on the wheel and you try to center it, it might feel lumpy and it's much, much harder to center and to get it to hold still. This process of wedging kind of makes the clay all really even, and it makes the clay feel softer when you're on the wheel, and it'll be much easier to center and to raise it and to open it, all those things. It'll be less wobbly, okay? It's not required that you do it, but especially if you're making something larger, it helps quite a bit. There's other benefits too, but this is just a basic demonstration. So this first technique, I'm gonna show you two techniques of how to wedge. This first one is called the ram's head technique. Your left and right hand do the exact same thing. I'm going to push the clay forward and bring my wrists together, roll my hands back, push my hands forward, bring my wrists together. And that's going to create a shape of clay. Now you'll notice my hands are on the side, left and right of the piece of clay. My fingers are gently wrapped around. I push forward and down, and I push forward and down and rotate my wrists together. That's going to create a shape of clay which kind of looks like an animal's head, like a ram's head. I always think a ram is like a goat. You can think of like a cow's head if you want, but it looks like an animal's like kind of skull a little bit, just a little bit. So this is the shape that you get. And if you want to see the animal head, these could be like the eyes. These would be like the nostrils, right? And then if you imagine there are like horns, right? That is the animal head. So you're getting this shape. You want these round parts where the horns would come from, and then you want kind of this T-shaped face. And we do this and we just rotate it. And what's happening is I'm taking the clay from the outsides, pushing it into the middle, and little air bubbles are popping because I'm creating a spiral. And as the clay spirals, thin layers of it pop the bubbles of clay. And we're popping every air bubble that's in the clay. Now, if I take my fingers and I dent it like that, and then I roll that over, I'm gonna trap air, and I'm actually doing the opposite. Okay, so it's important that when we do this, we try to keep this as smooth as possible. A lot of you don't have as much upper body strength as you might need to do this for a long period of time. This process you wanna do at minimum 50 times, usually about 100. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 to 50. Okay? By doing that, it will circulate all the clay from the inside to the outside, from the outside to the inside, and then we can check it, but 100 is usually the number. If you do it at these tables, the tables are very high up, and so it's gonna be all upper body, and your chest and your triceps, the back of your arm, will get very tired very quickly because you're not used to this motion. If you take it over to the pug clay chest here, and work in a clean area, if you're trying to keep your clay not contaminated and scrape it, if you work here and you wedge the clay, it's so far below your waist, you can use your legs. So instead of my arms doing a lot of this motion like a push-up, I can kind of keep my arms slightly bent, and I can bend my knees, and you'll be able to do this for a long time, right? But I'm moving my body so that the weight of my body moving back and forward from the ball of my foot to the heel of my foot to the ball of my foot, back and forth in a rhythm. That is going to do a lot of the work, and my arms are just kind of the vehicle that touch the ground. Okay? And so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. You can see the layers that have been spiraled here. When you want to finish this, it's less downward force and more rotating. And we want to rotate this gently all the way around. This will pop the last bubbles that need to be popped. And we're rotating it so that this little tongue here slowly thins out and wraps all the way around. Okay? And so this is now a wedged piece of clay. If I want to check how well I did, I can start cutting it, and I shouldn't see any air bubbles or inconsistencies. I can cut it really thin. And then hopefully when I open this up, you're not going to see any little air pockets. Another way to check, and you will always see something happening here, is that if I start bending the clay this way, it's going to maybe start opening or stretching a little bit. If I did this with clay that wasn't wedged well, I would start seeing big tears in it. But I wedged it pretty well, so you don't see any. I'm going to now put air pockets in this and then show you. You can kind of see here. There's like little air pockets there. Now, if I stick holes in this, right? So this has air in it. It looks the same. The clay is the same moisture content, but if you try to put this on the wheel and throw, you'll fail. If you try to hand build with this, it's gonna crack when you bend it. But now when I cut this open, you can see little air pockets, but I probably will be able to cut it and be like, oh, I don't see any air pockets there. But if I start bending it like this, you see how right away a big hole opens? I just didn't cut it on the hole. I cut it right above the hole because it's just a cross section. So when I'm cutting cross sections, if I lightly bend those out, you'll start seeing, that clay is not well mixed. And this will make it not center well because it's not all spinning together. These pieces are spinning separately and they're twisting against each other. Okay, so that is the ram's head technique of wedging. The last way I'm going to show you how to wedge is the what's called cone wedging or spiral wedging. You can do this with this size piece of clay. You can do this with twice as much, 3 times as much, or you can do it with half as much, right? I can do it with this amount too. I'm doing this a little bit larger amount because it's easier to see because I have big hands and it's easier to see on camera. But this style of wedging is almost exactly the same, with the exception that my hands are not doing the same thing. My left hand is in one shape and my right hand is in another shape. So it's like I'm holding an ice cream cone and I'm grabbing the ice cream on top. So it's called cone wedging. You can see there's like a cone here and there's also like an ice cream cone right there. It kind of looks like a conch shell, right? But as I do this, I roll it back the same way and I push down, but instead of pushing straight forward, I push at an angle. And the ram's head does 2 spirals. This does 1 spiral. This goes a little faster because the clay wraps around itself in 1 long spiral, so it actually is a thinner spiral and it pops the bubbles better, but they both work. And if you find one harder than the other, that's okay. But notice my fingertips don't dig in and I roll it back and forward. You can do this wrong and actually add air to it. It's important that it maintains that cone shape. And again, I would do this 50 times, but you'll notice my arms, I'm all upper body. Your arms will get tired from doing that. When you want to finish this one off, it's the same thing. I do a lot more rotation and less pushing forward. If you were going to put this on the pottery wheel, we wouldn't want to just stick this right down on the wheel because this right here would trap air. And so the last thing I do is I'm going to put this flat on the table. I'm going to smack it down flat on the table, and then I'm going to roll it around. And this is going to make sure I don't trap any air on the bottom. Okay? And then that's going to make kind of like a bottom that's nice and smooth. And then this edge right here, this clay, it's best if you hit this back in, because if there is any inconsistency, it will be right there. You can see like there a little bit. And so I hit that in. Now this clay would be ready if I had done that 50 times to put on the wheel and to throw or to roll slabs with. But that is the process of recycling. It's 2-part, drawing the clay out. We'll go back to our bone dry clay and you can see that bone dry clay now is liquid. It's completely gone. That piece that was in there is disintegrated. And so then I would take this and I could, suck the water off, pour the water out, whatever clay is left, I could pour on a board and finish it. It's only been about 10 minutes, but I'm gonna flip this now so you can see. So you'll be able to see that it's dried quite a bit. Now on the top, it's exactly the same moisture content. It's still really way too wet. But on the bottom, because this board was dry, you can see that there's water there, right? And on the underside of this, it is actually a lot drier than the other side, okay? And so if I put this back on that wet spot, it's not gonna dry anymore. I either need to use a new board or I could use the other side. And I put it down again and I press it down. And now if I leave that for 40 more minutes, this will be ready to do this with, okay? And so that's the process of recycling your clay. Like I said, this leather hard clay, it will slowly soften over time. It's easier to recycle the bone dry clay or to just keep your clay wet. But once it's in that middle zone where you would trim it or shave it or carve it, it's really hard to recycle that clay. It's best if you either break it into really small pieces or you let it dry out and then we rehydrate it from bone dry clay. Okay, is that it? That's it, okay. Look at that.